I'm going to present you the first part of my topic, which is women's role and position in the emergence of Homo sapiens a long, long time ago. The first thing I want to say is that I've always been captured by the idea coming from Charles Darwin that females are doing the sexual choice in the game of reproduction. And reproduction is essential for all species, including, of course, Homo sapiens. If we implement that idea, that means that women choose the male partners of theirs according to what they feel or think the result will be. They have in mind producing the most adapted young ones for life and the world they are living in. This is essential with any species, but it is going to be particularly essential with Homo sapiens because that species goes through a tremendous change, something like 300,000 years ago, by becoming a long-distance, fast, bipedal runner. This has an immediate consequence on the structure of the feet of Homo sapiens. The genus Homo genus has been bipedal for a long time already, but when it becomes a long distance and fast runner, because of its new position out of the forest, completely out of the forest, and hunting animals that run very fast and over long distances, he has the structure of his feet is changed so that he can do that kind of running. But this structure of the feet, due to or adapted to the long distance fast bipedal running, has a first consequence which is essential. The hips get narrower, and since they are a migrating species, women are running long distance too when they migrate along with men. So with men and with women, the hips are getting narrower, and that means that the children will be immature when they are born. Keep that in mind, because that is going to be essential for the second part of the presentation later on, when we are dealing with the position of children and women in society. What is important here is to see that a certain number of mutations are necessary for this bipedal, fast and long distance runner to emerge. To do that, the larynx has to change and become very deep, It is the pump of the breathing necessary for that kind of running. The second thing that is necessary is a strong diaphragm, which is the second part of the pump, the lever if you want, that is going to regulate the breathing. The third element, and that is essential, breathing in those circumstances is becoming or requires a great level of connections and coordinations of subglottal, including the larynx, glottal, and mouth articulatory elements that have to be commanded from the brain by a special nerve or set of nerves that is called the subglottal innervation. This innervation has to become more important and more effective as for enabling that very regular, deep breathing necessary for long distance running. Those mutations are not coming alone. They need another important evolution and mutation in the Broca zone or Broca area of the brain. That Broca area is the coordinating area in the brain, coordinating all sensory motor actions, operations, and this coordination, we have to coordinate for that particular running the heart rhythm, the breathing itself, including the diaphragm and the larynx and the whole subglottal, glottal, and mouth areas. But it will also have to coordinate the general stance of the body, the movement of the arms, because you run with your arms, but not by putting your hands on the ground, but by moving your arms in a certain way to speed up your body, to keep your torso ahead of your hips, because it's a torso that pulls you forward, and the legs, of course. There is a lot of training there, but at the same time, the coordination is not really training. It has to do with something that is acquired through training, but that is made possible by the development of the Broca area in the brain. All those mutations, and that's what is interesting, are essential or are producing the tools that will be necessary for human articulated language to be developed. But that will be later on. For the time being, we are just interested here in the women. What happens to that woman that has those characteristics, hence that is fit for long distance running if necessary, which means that they produce young ones that are immature and will be dependent for 2 to 3 years, and at the same time those women have to produce a certain number of young ones that will be the future of the species that has to expand if it wants to migrate. If we consider that to expand in order to migrate, 3 little ones have supposed to be brought to a full productive procreative life, That means that women between the age of 13, when they become fertile, and the age of 29, which is a normal life expectancy at the time, that is to say in 16 years, have to practically produce an average of 10 little ones, 10 pregnancy. That is exactly one pregnancy every 1 year and a half, 18 months. That is important what I say, because some women are not going to be fertile, they might even be sterile. Some women might die younger than 29. Some women might meet with some kind of accident. That is to say, all women who reach the age of 13 will not necessarily reach the age of 29, knowing that some might die when delivering the child, in childbirth, and the child along with the mother. That means that for those who have the chance of being fertile for the 16 years of normal life expectancy, they will have to produce one child every 18 months, 10 children all over. Maybe some will produce 11 or 12. That will enable some to produce only 8 or 9. If you take that into account, it is obvious that impregnation is fundamental and cannot be haphazard. Women in those days probably felt when they were becoming fertile, that is, felt ovulation, but at the same time, we must consider that observation is necessary, that measuring, counting days and days and days to exactly pinpoint the moment when the particular women we are dealing with is going to be fertile is necessary for that kind of cycle, what I call the fertility or pregnancy cycle of the woman, which is impregnation, pregnancy itself, and delivery, to be effective every 18 months. Knowing that on those 18 months, 12 or let's say 9, 10, or maybe a little bit more months or will be for the previous pregnancy, delivery, and the very beginning of taking care of the new baby. If we think like that, it's obvious that Alexander Marshak, who studied a lot of engravings on stones and bones, and considered, quite rightly in a way, that the various cycles, those engravings of marks that are lined up along lines or along, well, not necessarily straight line, let's say, that those engravings, he says, he considered, represented moon cycles. The point is that to observe the moon cycles is interesting, but at the same time, what is the objective of that? It could only be predicting eclipses, phenomena that are important for human beings, that might be considered as surprising, astonishing, like moon eclipses, or solar eclipses, where the moon plays the role of the screen. But the inscriptions, the various artifacts Marshak studies are not long enough to predict an eclipse. They only cover what he considers at the very most maybe 10 or 11 months at the most. 10, 11 months? That's not even a year. And there is not an eclipse every year. So it cannot predict eclipses. We know that from Stonehenge, from the Mayas, from many other civilizations, that human beings were very impressed, very much impressed by eclipses. But the engravings that Marshak is studying do not give any kind of grasp on the phenomenon of eclipses and cannot predict them. That's why I say moon is probably not the objective, because it doesn't bring, those inscriptions do not bring anything as for what could be interesting in the moon cycles. But if you consider another cycle, which is the fertility cycle of women and the pregnancy cycle of women, more generally, that is starting with the menstrual cycle of women and then the full pregnancy cycle of women after impregnation, you find out that there you can have interesting observation from what Marshak has studied. If we consider first the menstrual cycle, the menstrual cycle, as compared to the 29.5-day moon cycle, is about the same length. That is to say, it varies a lot more, it's between 21 and 35 days, but the average, I was going to say normal length of menstrual cycle is 27, 28 or 29 days. Actually, it's a little bit shorter than the moon cycle, but very little. If we consider that, the comparison with the moon cycle is simple. The ovulation is exactly in the middle, just like the full moon. So what Marshak considered as being the observation of a moon cycle can just as well be satisfied with the idea that it is not a moon cycle, but that it is a menstrual cycle with the ovulation, that is to say the fertile period of 3 to 4 days maximum, right in the middle. And then we could compare before the ovulation, after the ovulation, according to two possible cycles. It could be the uterine cycle or the ovarian cycle. Both of them give you half, 3 days and half. That is to say, about 12 to 14 days before, 12 to 14 days after, 2-3 days in the middle. With, on the first 12 or 14 days before, you must consider that you have 3 to 4 days for the period. That's starting the first half of the of the menstrual cycle. And if we then project that kind of cycle onto the inscriptions and engravings that Marshak studied, it is quite obvious that if it is only about 30 days or so, it is observing the fertility moment so that the woman can be impregnated right at the right moment. And to be impregnated right at the right moment, that means it has to be ritualized, that throws away, for at least before the last ice age, that is, before 21,000 years ago, before 19,000 before Christ, that throws away the idea that one man was going with one woman and that there was any kind of a cellular, regular, permanent basis in that relationship. In fact, this relationship between a man and a woman was determined by some kind of social choice that had little to do with regularity and permanence. If we get rid of the idea of a cellular family, if we get rid of the idea of a monogamous, lifelong relationship, we can understand that impregnating a woman was ritualistic, managed. If we say that, the longer cycles, or the longer inscriptions that cover up to 9, 10, or 11 months, are not an observation this time of the menstrual cycle, but are the observation of a full pregnancy cycle, because it is important to know how long the pregnancy is going to last and what may happen during that pregnancy. There might be some moment where it is more difficult for the pregnancy to go through. Abortion didn't exist, I guess, but miscarriage existed. And there are moments, periods in a pregnancy where miscarriage is more common. And then it is important also to predict the birth, that is, when the child is going to be delivered. And there you see that the cycles we're speaking of, and even if we consider that they are lunar behind, because a pregnancy is 10 lunar cycles, what is observed is not the moon cycle, but what is observed is a pregnancy cycle, measured in moon cycles. That I would very easily accept. And there the two, or what Marshak says and what I say, can be brought together, and when they are brought together, you have most of those inscriptions become relevant and significant and meaningful. Significant because it is essential for the deliverer of the child to know when it's going to happen and what you have to do all along, and meaningful because the observation has an objective, and the objective is to bring a child to life, and that is not exactly just looking at the moon. When you consider that, that brings another way of looking at what Marshak calls woman as a goddess. She is a goddess, but not in a vague meaning that it seems to imply. She is a goddess, and she is a triple goddess, and this is inscribed in many representations of women in those days, that is, between 45,000 before Christ and, let's say, 15,000 before Christ, Paleolithic and Magdalenian. This concept of a triple goddess, that is, of women being special because they are the progenitors, they are bringing new life to the tribe, to the community, they are providing the community with expansion and the possibility to migrate. So they also provide the homogeneous with that possibility. You can find that in some of the documents, some of the pictures, some of the engraving, once again, that Marsha gives, but it doesn't see that triple nature of women. Let's take his example of Abri Maigre in Teja Dordogne, an engraving that represents women schematically, but this representation of women is systematically this time ternary. First, you have the 3 levels of the woman seen as a procreator. The vulva at the bottom, the womb in the center, and the breast as a third layer of the body. Those breasts are 2, and they are clearly identified with 2 strokes that are added where the tits are supposed to be. But they are made ternary with 2 lines, one hashed and the other one not hashed. 2 lines over each breast. That makes the 2 lines and the breast make 3, twice 3, and you get to 6. If you take into account the 2 strokes on the breasts, you're going to get to 8. But the ternary structure of the vulva, the womb, and the breast is amplified, and this time purely symbolically, by 2 extra vulvas on the body between the wound and the breast, which means that there are 2 vulvas that are where they shouldn't be, but 2 and 1 make 3, and that is the ternary nature of that lady. She is a procreator, she is a triple goddess because of that, and you could look at other details of the engraving, of the representation. All of them are ternary, ternary, and ternary again. That enables us to move to another engraving that Marshak studies, but doesn't study the way he could have used it. It is from La Madeleine in Dordogne, and it represents a vulva on the left. On the left if you put it horizontally, on the top if you put it vertically, and 2 penises and the head of a bear on the right or on the bottom. The 2 penises, one penetrates the vulva of the woman, the other one confronts the bear's head. The one that penetrates the vulva of the woman is smaller than the one that confronts the bear's head. The big one confronting the bear's head is man as a hunter, and the smaller one penetrating the vulva, or confronting the vulva if you prefer, is man as a procreator. Man is not seen as ternary, he is seen as binary. And that is interesting, because that binary nature associated to the ternary nature of the woman are going to produce the expansion of the species, the migration of the species, the survival of the species. when you are there, you can look, or we could look at the famous woman of Predmost in Czechia. And this lady represents exactly what I've just explained, that is to say, the procreative cycle. She is presented with 3 levels taken vertically, on the bottom, but horizontally, an extended vulva, in the middle, smaller but more realistic as for the size of the lady, the womb centered on the belly button, and over the womb the 2 breasts, that is, the feeding of the child. Those are the 3 levels of the procreation or procreative power of women. They can get impregnated, get pregnant, they can deliver, and then they can feed the child. Everything is in that ternary presentation. If you add the head, that would make 4, and then we are starting counting. We had 1 vulva, 1 womb, 2 breasts, then the head, that makes 4. The 3 levels of the procreation of the woman, then the head, that makes 4. If you add the 2 arms, that makes 6. If you add the, what do I say? Totally wrong, but never mind. Because the 2 breasts, the womb, makes 4. Then you add the head, that makes 5. The 2 hands or the 2 arms makes 7, and then the 2 legs that make 9. And I suggest here that instead of only thinking that counting was a male activity, and that they use their hands, and only their hands and their feet, their toes, their fingers and their toes, maybe at times, as Lévi-Brühl suggested, the hands, the elbows, the shoulders, the head in the middle, and you get to other numbers and other bases if you go down the second arm in the same way. There I say, you have another way of counting from women's procreative power. The vulva and the womb and the breast, that makes 3 layers. That makes 4. And you add the head, that makes 5. And the 2 arms, 7. And then the 2 legs, 9. Some of those numbers are essential, aren't they? And then when you look at the head of that lady, which is represented in a very schematic, the same kind of style, but very schematically, you have the 2 eyes very strongly and extended. She is a seer with a nose in between the 2 eyes. And then you have the 2 lips. She is also a speaker. And those 2 characteristics of the woman, the 2 eyes and the mouth, the 2 eyes and the 2 lips, the 2 eyes, the nose and the 2 lips, and once again you're counting, she's a seer and she's a speaker. Why is she a seer, why is she a speaker? And that would have to be studied in a second presentation, because she is the one who sees beyond simple life, today's life. She is in communication with the spirits, and she's a speaker because she can speak to the child, but she can speak also to the spirits. That is to say, this vision of the woman, it is a Gravettian presentation, or Gravettian inscriptions, engraving. Gravettian is about 30,000 years ago, this presentation of the woman is that of a spiritual leader, a spiritual person who has a spiritual role in society and who plays that spiritual role in society properly. When you come to that idea, we can come to a simple set of conclusions. First, women is sacred and ritualized because she represents the fertility cycle, the pregnancy cycle, and the life-giving cycle, all of them based on the menstrual cycle. The second idea is that the fertility cycle means impregnation, pregnancy, delivery, and everything must be planned and organized and observed because it has to happen effectively every 18 months. And the third conclusion is that woman is a triple goddess. She is systematically represented as being triple, whereas man is rather systematically represented as being binary. When man is represented, it is rarely represented as a whole. And this triple goddess nature of those women in those representations bring the idea that woman is a seer, is a speaker, she's in contact with spirits, she has a spiritual role to play, and she plays it. She is then, because of an important role as for producing children and delivering one every 18 months, so that she has one in her womb, one on her let's say in her arms, and using her breast or feeding from her breast, and one or two more around her that she had to take care of. That implies it is not an individual problem. It has to be considered, it has to be conceived as being collective, organized, social. And that leads to the idea that in that situation we have a sexual division of labor to enable the spiritual being that the woman is, the triple goddess that woman is, to be able to guarantee the expansion of the community and the migration of individuals in that community. Hence, the survival of the community and of the species. That will be all for today. Have a good day.